Welcome back. We're talking again about the legislative session this year and what your Legislative Policy Committee volunteers have been actively working on now that the session has completed. We're back and we're talking about some bills in Housing and Regulatory Subcommittee. And this is a big one. House Bill 1362 is the statewide building code bill around green energy. So this bill is a success in making a bill much better. The original version of the bill would have mandated that every local government in the state has to adopt a yet to be written, yes, right, adopting something you haven't even seen, 2024 building code. And the problem with that approach is there is a very big difference between what you might be able to build as a green energy option in the mountains, say, than the Front Range. Due to CAR and many other housing and municipal and county stakeholder engagement in this process, the bill has been watered down much more to a place where we can all agree is a better housing policy going forward. What it will do is change the authority so that it's not just the Department of Energy office, it's also the Department of Local Affairs, who is where the Division of Housing lives in our executive agencies. They have joint authority over creating these statewide building codes. The other thing that is very important is all these statewide building codes will be written by a much enhanced legal body of the state. So instead of it just being 5 or 6 people, it's up to 16 different representatives, including more local government representation, which we think is very important to understand the nuances around our state and respect local control. But also they have to prioritize housing affordability and cost effectiveness when they write these codes so that there are affordable ways to build green if consumers choose to do that. The other thing that's super important, knowing that we are a state that deals with a lot of wildfire mitigation and potential danger from wildfires, is there is a waiver process now created in the bill so that if your home is destroyed, you have the ability to apply for a waiver so that you don't have to be compliant with a really expensive previous code when you rebuild, because that makes a huge difference in what the price to rebuild is. So that is a very big bill, House Bill 1362. We'll be watching the regulatory process as it develops, and we'll be giving you guys updates. Another bill that was a major bill in the session is Senate Bill 22238. So for those of you that might remember in some of our previous meetings in Vail, we talked about all these statewide housing ballot measures that were coming forth. And we were pretty scared about a very expensive ballot cycle that was going to attack property taxes or affordable housing in one way or another. Well, I'm happy to say that due to Iowa advocacy and several other stakeholders involved in the conversation, we were able to make sure that we did not see 5 housing ballot measures. So there's no luxury tax on homes valued at $2 million or more. There's no property tax like Prop 13 coming to Colorado from California and a few others. What the bill actually does is make your property taxes very complicated for the next 4 to 5 years. So I'm just going to break it out in sort of the basics of what it does, but I highly encourage you to be very in touch with your local assessor. What it does, it's $700 million, and it basically, for the first couple of years, reduces property taxes for both residential property, single family, and multifamily for the very first time commercial. For the next 2 years, your property taxes will be reduced at the 238 bill level. And then in year 3 and 4, we go back to a bill passed last year that was temporary property tax relief during the pandemic. And so we do that for years 3 and 4. And then in year 5 to 6, we go back to normal property taxes. But it is going to be complicated, but we're happy to see so many housing bills go off the ballot measure cycle this year because all the parties agreed to support this bill going forward. And then we will work towards what happens in the future. So that's a very big deal. I want to talk about a couple of our bills around insurance and disaster preparation. This was a very big year after the Marshall Fire of what policy needs to change at the Capitol and how can we do a better job of helping homeowners. So House Bill 221111 is all about insurance coverage when you go through a terrible process and tragedy of losing your home. What it will do is change homeowners insurance requirements so that if you lose your home, you have a point of contact for the insurance company, and you have extended time to get that inventory and all of that process together. This is going to be very important so that we have remedies and constant communication for anyone who has to deal with the horrible process of losing a home to fire. Senate Bill 22206 is kind of a tag team bill, I would say, with that one. I'm going to first talk about what the bill does and then really talk about why the bill was such a big deal to the LPC and our Government Affairs Division. So first, the bill is really exciting in that we're finally going to give funding to victims of wildfires or declared natural disasters to rebuild their homes. The state has never before done that, and they're creating re-grant programs to do that. The other thing that is really interesting in this bill is we're going to study the issue of underinsurance and try to figure out proactively what the solution should be going forward. And we'll be very interested to see what comes out of the conversations with the Commissioner of Insurance on that topic. But the biggest part of this bill is what didn't get into the bill. And that was a very disastrous amendment that was going to be added onto the bill in the last week of session. It would have put in place a statewide building code for fire resiliency on top of that other green energy code bill that we saw in a bill conversation a couple sessions back. But the reason that it's problematic is while the green energy building code rectified a lot of the language around affordability, this fire resiliency code had no language in it for affordability. Now, CAR is very supportive of creating defensible space and ensuring that you have an option as a consumer to build as green or as fire resilient as you would like to. The problem with this bill is there's no difference between, say, removing a tree at $2,500 and making everyone in the state have a metal roof at $100,000 per home. That is a very big difference when we think about affordability. And we also wanted more local government involvement in writing these fire resiliency codes. So the amendment was scrapped. I think that conversation will continue into the next couple of sessions, but you can be sure CAR will be at the helm watching to make sure we put in place policy that makes sense for fire mitigation, consumers, and our ability to build affordable housing. One last bill I want to touch on before we close today is House Bill 221287. This bill is a comprehensive bill, nearly more than 50 pages, on protections for mobile home park residents. While most of the bill we didn't have strong problems with because we communicated with several of our housing providers who work in this space, and what it would do is extend process for residents that are trying to purchase their mobile home park. We found that oftentimes they're competing with market forces, and it's hard to get an offer to purchase your own park in 90 days. So the time will extend to 120 days to give them more time to compete with those private market offers. That part's not problematic. What was problematic, and this is a recurring theme today, of what was in the bill that is now not, that was taken out. And this bill was the bill that had rent control in it, rent stabilization, rent control, no matter how you frame it. When you're requiring rents to be tied to inflation up to a certain percentage, it's the same as straight rent control. And we were adamantly opposed to the rent control piece of this bill. communicated it throughout the interim during the session. And we're happy to say that even though the bill sponsors might have been reluctant to take it out of the bill, the governor was willing to veto it unless that provision was removed. So that provision came out. The final bill has no rent control in it. And again, while our process is not about apartments and renting, we do home ownership, we're very worried about rent control being something that would spread through precedent. And since rent control is not a viable public policy option, it really helps only a small few at the expense of very many have-nots. We're happy to see that provision of the bill come out. So that concludes our bills today. There are many more bills. We obviously didn't talk about all 103 today, but when you get a chance, thank an LPC member and thank what RPAC does for you, because investing in housing champions that help us get our voice heard at the Capitol is critical, and we couldn't do it without your support. Thanks for tuning in today to some of the bills in the legislative review, and we will see you next time.